All right, let's dive into a novel that kicks off with one of the biggest and, frankly, weirdest questions you can ask. What exactly is the self? I mean, not as some big philosophical idea, but as that thing you can actually feel. And what happens when that feeling just vanishes?
So get this. This is the very first line of the book, and it's the mystery that's going to drive this whole explainer. We're not talking about a search for identity or for meaning. No, this is literal. The man at the center of this story has genuinely, physically lost his sense of self.
So who is this guy? His name's Pell, and his condition is absolutely fascinating. Just try to imagine waking up to a voice in your head. And it's not a hallucination. It's more like a narrator, calmly building a reality, second by second. Saying things like, Pell is now waking up. That is his ceiling. The actual experience of living and the story being told about that experience have completely split apart. He's become a character in his own life.
So how do you even begin to deal with something like that? Well, Pell's journey isn't really about finding a cure. It's more about finding a map for this incredibly strange new territory he's found himself in. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds a little bit like depersonalization, which is a real psychological condition, but Pell says no, that's not it. He makes this really crucial distinction. It's not that he feels detached, it's that he can suddenly see the machinery, the nuts and bolts that builds the self. He compares it to seeing the hidden arrow in the FedEx logo for the first time, Once you see it, you can never, ever unsee it. So Pell finds himself with a choice. He can go to a regular hospital where they'll try to cure him, to reassemble him, or he can go to this place called the Lethean Institute. And since he's a cartographer by trade, a map maker, the choice is kind of obvious. He doesn't want to be fixed, he wants to understand. He wants to map this bizarre inner landscape he's discovered. At the Institute, the story really starts to open up, because Pell finds out pretty quick. He is not alone. This place is less like a clinic and more like a living, breathing museum of the mind. And he's about to meet the other exhibits.
And wow, what a collection of minds. Each resident you see reveals a different piece of the puzzle. They show us how the self is put together by showing what happens when a specific part breaks down. You've got Sable, whose memories have zero emotional weight. They just feel like facts she read in an encyclopedia. Then there's Gloss, who's living through multiple drafts of himself all at once. Yetta, she lives in this radical, constant now, totally cut off from her past. And then there's Curren, who has the exact opposite problem of our guy Pell.
The contrast between Pell and Curren is just incredible. They are perfect opposites. If Pell feels a complete absence of self, like a movie playing in an empty theater, Curren feels an overwhelming, suffocating excess of it. He describes it as being trapped in a room with someone who will not shut up about themselves, except that person is you.
But here's the thing. These residents aren't just patients to be studied, they actually become explorers. And led by Pell, they start to document their strange inner worlds in this really unique way.
And this is where Pell's old job becomes this amazing, powerful metaphor. He starts drawing maps, right? But not of physical places. He's mapping the very shape and texture of subjective experience. He charts things like the gap, that tiny little space between an experience happening and his narrator describing it. Or the commons, this theoretical place where the consciousness of all the residents seems to overlap.
And then the head of the institute, Dr. Lorn, she reveals what the real museum is. It's not the building, it's not even the residents. It's the archive. All the records from decades of research. It's basically a huge collection of every failed attempt to put these indescribable experiences into words. And she says that failure, that gap between experience and language, that's the whole point. That's the most interesting place in the world.
Okay, so this is where everything starts to click into place. The residents, they're feeling a little bit like they're just data points in someone else's study. So they decide to run their own unsanctioned experiment, and it's all driven by one huge question.
Think about it. Their entire lives at the Institute are all about being watched and recorded and analyzed. So they start to wonder, what happens if you take the observer away? What is consciousness actually like in its natural, unobserved state?
So what do? Their experiment is just beautifully simple. They agree to meet at midnight. No outside observers, so no Dr. Lorn. There are no rules, no instructions, no goal. They just sit together in a room in total silence, and they close their eyes.
And the result is, well, it's absolutely stunning. Pell writes about it in his journal later. He says that for just a moment, the 5 of them stopped being 5 separate people. Their individual selves, the absence, the excess, the broken memories, all of it just dissolved. They became, in his words, a single shared consciousness, a single instrument with 5 openings.
So, you see, the big conclusion of this whole journey isn't some neat little answer. It's a fundamental, radical shift in perspective. It suggests that our deeply held belief in being a single, isolated self might just be an illusion. That maybe the self isn't a solid thing at all, but a collective, ever-changing process.
And that brings it all right back to us, doesn't it? We all walk around every day with this invisible mechanism inside our heads, constantly creating our sense of I. So the book leaves us with this one last haunting question to think about. If that mechanism suddenly became visible to you, what do you think you would see?